Matthew Holten is an author and non-profit leader who has a unique vision for a new economic system. In his book, Moneyless Society, The Next Economic Evolution, Holten shares his perspective on how a moneyless society could potentially create a better future for all. And Matthew joins us now. How are you today?
Wonderful. How about yourself?
I'm excellent, thank you. So, how do you envision a society without currency actually functioning?
Great question. Essentially, it really comes down to people just working with each other more, and not having to conduct a transaction for every single thing that happens, and preferably pretty much nothing. That's the goal is to provide an abundance of what people need. So it essentially obsoletes currency and the trade-based system, essentially, to where you have to perform labor or have some sort of currency to where it's this for that. Essentially we want to create systems and structures that give people everything that they need, and just have it highly automated, essentially. So it requires a lot less human labor, and just eliminating unnecessary human labor is a large part of it, but as well as just creating those agreements, mutual aid agreements, automation, technology, and really utilizing all that to the fullest extent possible.
And you say it's about people working together more. Surely that goes against human nature, because our nature is to look out for ourselves mainly, as opposed to sharing our resources. So how's that going to work? Because surely you can't incentivize somebody to do work for no financial reward.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty big misconception too that human nature is actually this selfish thing, because the majority of our evolution for the last hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, we existed in communities, and if one person was thriving within that community, then everybody was thriving within that community. And it's only within about the last 12,000 years or so that capitalism and capitalism hasn't been around for 12,000 years, but our current kind of mode of this agrarian economy, where we're kind of more in these individual units where we're kind of taking care of ourselves, that's a very recent thing in our history, and it seems commonplace to us because it's all we know.
Yeah.
But if you actually look at evolution and even a lot of the most recent research that's coming out regarding species that thrive, it's the ones that cooperate with each other, and it's the ones that actually have beneficial systemic relationships within their species and even with other species, say like bees and flowers. That's a cooperative relationship there, to where they're both getting something that they need. And there's no reason that humans can't engineer things like that as well. It's just consciously doing so, because we've engineered our society to be this rugged, individualistic society where we're all separated on our little boxes and everything. And that's kind of the mentality and mindset that we're all used to, essentially. And it will be a pretty big paradigm shift for people to essentially start thinking. It's a change of thought to where it's not, how can I get everything that I need, but how can we produce enough for everybody? How can everybody thrive? And there's a pretty big change in a paradigm shift there. Just, thinking that there's not enough and that I have to get what I need, and that's going to be at the expense of somebody else or something like that, as opposed to, there is enough, especially if we all cooperate with one another and we focus on just producing abundance, so everybody can get what they need.
So given that the current economic system is so entrenched in our society now, what challenges do you anticipate in convincing people to embrace the moneyless society?
Sure, it's a great question. One of the main challenges, I think, is going to be, just like I was saying, the mindset that it's even possible. Because right now, these conversations are barely happening in the public realm. And there's a lot of people that just haven't even really considered that this is a possibility, and for things like this to come into place, to be manifested in our world, we have to think it can actually happen, and that's going to be a big shift, and because a lot of people don't even think it can actually happen. They're like, oh, well, it's just impossible. That's socialism or communism, and it always ends up in authoritarianism and millions of deaths and things like that. And And it's not really the case, because we actually have some really good models in today's society as well that are shifting in that direction. For instance, cooperatives. I don't know if you're familiar with cooperatives, but I talk a lot about worker cooperatives in particular as being a structure that we can use to transition to that type of society. Worker cooperatives are a type of business entity where the workers actually own part of the company. So where they actually have an ownership interest, they receive profits and dividends from that company. And workers are actually incentivized a lot more to do a good job because they own part of the company and they will actually receive some of those benefits. And there's multiple wonderful examples of cooperatives working really well in our society too. Like the town of Marinelda in Spain has been a co-op. It's got about 2,500 people. It's an agricultural co-op. They've been around for about 30 years. They don't have mortgages. They also don't have a police force because they don't need one. And people just simply get what they need. There's another federation of cooperatives in the north and eastern part of Syria, in the region known as Rojava. It's a large region actually, and they are a cooperative federation. And a lot of the time, they just bypass the monetary system altogether and give people what they need. The largest cooperative in the world, called Mondragon, has about 80,000 employees and 100 different companies as subsidiaries, and they're a powerhouse manufacturer of solar modules. They have their own university. They have a town that thousands of people live there and contribute to this company and everything. And the model works really well when you actually give people more ownership and more democratic say in what actually happens with these companies. And we see there being a shift in mindset towards less people being exploited by this capitalist structure. So it's no longer this hierarchical structure, pyramid with one person or the investors at the top telling everybody what to do. That ownership and the decision making is more distributed in a horizontal fashion, to where we get people actually more involved in the process and they have a say in what happens with the company. And they also receive more of the benefits from these companies as well. And we view these as really being kind of a transitional tool that we can use to create these systems of abundance, and what would it start as? Say maybe there's one co-op that produces food, right, and another co-op that produces housing. If they get enough of a surplus, they can start providing their own members with those things for free, right? And then maybe they can network together. So the co-op that produces food provides the co-op, the people that are involved in the co-op that produces housing with food, and vice versa, right? And so they can network together and start providing each other things for free. And that's kind of the model that we're looking to adopt and build upon and use as a transitional model, to eventually create a moneyless society. But I'd like to say that there would be a big transitional period with all of this as well. So it's kind of like, how would it look in transition, versus how would it look, say, several decades or, lifetimes in the future when all of this is really solidified, more kind of like of a Star Trek economy sort of a thing.
So what would that transition look like and how long would it take?
Well, there's, various stages to it. The stage that we're in right now is really just kind of creating awareness, right? That this is actually possible. And that's what we do as an organization. I have the book that I just finished, Moneyless Society. We have a nonprofit as well. We have a podcast. And so we really like to get that message out there that, hey, these things are actually possible if we make them possible, if we focus on building them and creating them in our world. But like I was saying, eventually people will probably start to come together and form small communities and cooperatives that are focused on at least heading that direction. It's not going to be an overnight thing to where we're going to have all these systems in place and all of a sudden it's going to be like, oh, we just built a moneyless society last week. It works great. But it's going to be more of an experimental process that'll probably last decades, really. I don't even know if I'm going to see anything like it come to fruition within my lifetime. It would be great if I do, but there will probably be smaller, maybe some larger groups of people that come together and start building communities, cooperatives, and forming these arrangements to bypass the monetary and the banking and the trade system altogether. And a lot of it will be producing things locally as well. Like what can we produce locally here in our community, and sustainably, because sustainability is a big part of it, with climate change and us just using resources to kingdom come without any regard as to, what that's actually doing to the world, our environment, or how much is actually left of a lot of these things. That's because capitalism essentially incentivizes just resource use and resource exploitation, no holds barred, and now it's really catching up with us to where we have to do something about it. We have to scale down. We have to start producing our food, our products, and things like that locally and communities. Otherwise, we're going to extinct ourselves. And that's just a fact of the matter because we're using far too many resources far too fast. And we're also running out of places to put our trash, which includes CO2 in the atmosphere and climate change and all that situation. So there's a lot to unpack there.
You see, it's a kind of long transition. Is that ideal? Because if this is something you're really passionate about, I guess you'd want it to happen tomorrow if it could.
If it could, yeah. I mean, but I think it would be high hopes, to really think of that any of this is going to come to fruition within just a few years.
Yeah.
I mean, we're heading that direction, and don't get me wrong, I want this to happen as soon as humanly possible, especially in smaller pockets. It's kind of like a proof of concept sort of thing. But realistically, it's probably going to be decades before the idea really catches on and before people that really start to make that transitional minds, the shift in mindset to where they can envision it being possible, or they've seen instances of it actually working in their real life. We think that's going to be kind of one of the main catalysts to this happening is actual communities being developed and in working order to where people are getting what they need and bypassing the monetary system altogether. If you can go and visit a community next week or next month to where that's actually happening, to where you can see automation and technology really utilized to their fullest potential and people cooperating and just, getting along and making agreements. Okay, great. And creating an abundance of food and other things that they actually need. It's possible. The larger things like cars and computers and things like that are probably going to have to be regionally produced in larger facilities, with higher technology and things like that. But food and shelter and clothing and a lot of the very basic necessities, we can produce a lot of that locally in our own communities right now if we really put our minds to it. And that's kind of the shift in mindset that we really want to adopt. And then, and further in the future, it'll probably expand into the larger items like cell phones and computers and healthcare and education and energy and, the things that it really takes more infrastructure and larger scale, institutions and organizations to produce, essentially. So.
And how far do you imagine it going? Because food makes complete sense that you'd want that to be shared without money. But if we don't have any money anymore, I can't just go and pick up a massive aeroplane that would cost millions of pounds. That would be ridiculous, surely.
Yeah, and honestly, it's kind of ridiculous to do that now for just one person to have a massive airplane that costs millions of pounds at the expense of what? At the expense of, thousands of tons of CO2 going into the atmosphere, at the expense of, thousands of workers and everything else that all had to work together to provide one person with one plane. Now, on the other hand, what we really do want to create is access to things like that. Not to where you own your own plane. You're like, this is my plane. I get my. Not everybody's not going to be able to have their own plane. Sorry to break it to you. The world doesn't have that many resources, but we really do want to create systems to where people have access to those things that they need. So instead of say vehicles are a great example, right? Not everybody needs to own their own vehicle, especially not 2 or 3 vehicles that just sit in their driveway for 22 hours a day doing nothing.
Yeah.
What we want to create are, say, automated vehicles, autonomous vehicles that drive themselves around and pick you up and drop you off whenever and wherever you need it. And then that vehicle goes on to its next destination, picks up the next person, drops them off where they need it, and so on and so forth. And this way, we could probably reduce the amount of vehicles that are needed by probably 80 or 90%. Especially if a lot of the human labor is not necessary anymore, and these leisurely travel, it would be leisure instead of sorry, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but a lot of the travel we envision as not being necessary today simply because it has to be generating economic activity just for people to survive, and so we're well, we need to scale this down a bit. We need to have a controlled kind of economic contraction and kind of have people voluntarily be I don't really need to drive across town for this because it can be produced locally. Or Or, if we do that, we do it in a more sustainable way, with vehicles that are, powered by renewable energy, that aren't fossil fuel vehicles. And let's say, and it's not to say that we couldn't have luxuries either. We could travel across the world, and planes that are powered by renewable energy as well. We could have networks of cooperatives all over the world. So let's say you're in, New York, and you help somebody build an automated garden in a cooperative there, and the project is done. You all throw a big party and everything, and you have a great time, and you meet a bunch of new people, and that project's done. So you're like, okay, how about next we go to Portugal and we build an automated garden in Portugal now or something. And so you go do the same thing there, and you build an automated garden, and you meet other people, and you have a good time. But it's also kind of like traveling and a vacation at the same time too, because you don't have to do it. You don't really have to work. It's something you chose to do and that you're probably, hopefully, interested in doing,
Yes.
or if you want to go in somewhere and, go to a particular school and have an education or something like that. It's kind of like, and we envision a lot of these systems kind of being more interconnected too. So let's say like the education that Harvard has might be available online to everybody, and you don't have to pay for that sort of thing, or it's just kind of up for debate and up for experimentation too, as to how a lot of these things will end up coming together and evolving as well. And we don't say there's one right way to do all of this. We just say, it might work this way, it might not work that way, but let's find out, let's experiment with it and see what ways could work, and what works in one place might not work in another place. The food that's growing in Florida, probably some of it's probably not going to grow, say, in Alaska or Siberia or places like that, So what works in one place might not necessarily work in another place. And it's going to have, different visions and outcomes and aims depending on where people are, their climate, their geography, even their culture, and what they want, out of their local society and environment and community and everything like that. So it's a complex subject with a lot of moving parts. But I do dive into a lot of it in my book, and I kind of scratch the surface of a lot of it, because we could talk even just about how you could produce energy in a moneyless society for hours, but there's so many different aspects to it. It's hard to sum it up all in just a 30-minute conversation. So.
Yeah. And are you hoping to make a lot of money from the book?
It would be great, because honestly, it's going to take a lot of money to create these systems, and I would be giving the book away for free if I didn't have bills to pay and a family to feed and things like that. But on the other hand, we do ask for donations for our organization, and people give us a lot of grief for that. They're like, "Oh, you're Moneyless Society, you're asking for donations." Like, yeah, we still exist in a capitalist world, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, creating these systems is going to take money. It's going to take resources. It's going to take people, a lot of which will have to be paid for their labor. We're going to have to buy property and build houses and build structures and repurpose other structures, and we're going to need resources. So yeah, the more money we can get involved in this, the easier and faster it will be to create these structures, because they're not going to happen all on volunteer labor. I can guarantee you that much.
And if you do make a lot of money from this book, let's say you make so much, you put it all in your savings or whatever, what happens to that money once we transition into a moneyless society?
I mean, that's a great question. Essentially, my goal isn't to have a massive savings account, with $1 billion in it. I'm not too concerned with becoming one of the richest people in the world or even extremely wealthy. I want to start creating these systems and structures. And I mean, if there's a bank account with a bunch of ones and zeros in it, whatever. If we don't need it anymore, it's obsolete. What happens, to the milkman or the medieval knight? Essentially, do they even exist anymore? What happened to the elevator operator? Do we even need those things anymore in our life? Yeah. No, not at this point, because we push a button and it just happens. Milk is at our grocery stores, and there's no longer roaming hordes of barbarians that we need a medieval knight to protect us from. So if we have a bank account with a bunch of ones and zeros in it, yet we have everything that we need, why would we even care? But it's not my goal to make a ton of money. It's my goal to make money and then put that money into creating these systems, and that's my ultimate goal, is to see these systems come about, hopefully some of them within my lifetime, which maybe they will. I've got another 40 or 50 years probably if I live a good long life. But yeah, it's a great question too. It's like, what does happen to the money? Well, well, what happens to toilet paper when it goes down down the drain? Same sort of thing. It's just, do you need it anymore? Not really.
I suppose the general idea of a moneyless society would aim to help with this, but charities work by receiving money, donations. How can you help a charity as an individual anymore?
Well, if we have charities in a moneyless society, they're probably not going to look the same way that they do now. I mean, the ultimate goal is to create abundance everywhere on planet Earth, essentially. So there is not one single person out there that is going without what they need. And I'll just give you a little bit of backstory on myself, too. I mean, it's kind of relevant because it's one of the reasons why I created the organization and wrote the book. I had somewhat of a tumultuous childhood growing up. My mother committed suicide when I was 15 years old. She couldn't get the help that she needed from the medical system. She got in a car accident. She got severe whiplash in her neck. She got addicted to painkillers and eventually went schizophrenic. She started hearing things that weren't there. She thought the government was out to get us and stuff like that. Eventually, she jumped off a bridge. That happened when I was 15 years old, completely destroyed my childhood. I ran away from home. I dropped out of school, and I subsequently had a really difficult time getting the things that I needed too, especially education, mental health care, things like that. And I really struggled to fit into society. I've had over 100 different jobs. I've waited tables at 8 different restaurants. I've delivered pizza 7 different times. I've had 20 different telemarketing jobs. I've been a real estate agent, a poker dealer, a piano teacher, an insurance agent, and the list goes on. And I'm tired of seeing businesses just exploit other people for their own gain. I'm tired of the healthcare system that doesn't give a crap about anybody and just cares about profits. I'm tired of the banking sector saying it's going to do things to help people and then basically doing nothing, and just being more concerned about their own personal profits and interests. And that's essentially what our current monetary system incentivizes. So I wanted to check out of society. I wanted to go live in an eco village or something like that and say, screw you, I'm out of here. But I had a kid too at a young age because I was kind of this promiscuous teenager, very rebellious and whatnot. And so I ended up paying child support. Plus, I really wanted to be a part of my daughter's life as well. So I couldn't really just be this nomad traveling around the world. I was forced to kind of go out there and be a part of society and get a job and this and that and the other, even though I kind of failed at it miserably time and time again. But I saw a movie called Zeitgeist Addendum that presented this thing called the Venus Project. The Venus Project kind of has this idea called a resource-based economy, which is this very futuristic sort of society. But there was no community out there that was actually trying to build this futuristic sort of society. I was like, I would have jumped on the opportunity to go live in a community and start developing these sorts of systems and technologies and things like that. But it didn't exist. And so I was like, well, if we can start creating these communities, if we can start creating groups of people who are interested in creating these, systems and structures and functions and everything, then that's what I really want to do, and that's what these systems and structures, the purpose of them is to give people what they need, in everyday life without them having to go out and work 40 hours a week at some job that may or may not be benefiting humanity. And a lot of these jobs out there do not benefit humanity. They are simply sucking up resources and wasting people's time and driving them into the grave, all for the sake of the almighty dollar, and we can have so much wonderful things and so much abundance if we just focus on creating the systems and structures to do that. And that's the main goal of the organization. We want to create these communities. We want to create the cooperatives. We want to give people what they need. It's basically a worldwide charity. We want to show people that it's possible. We want to create it in real life. We want to help other people do that too, all around the world. And whatever ways we can do that, that's what we're working on doing, essentially.
Well, what's the next steps for you in order to spread the word?
Well, the next steps for us is really just to get out there and creating these communities and cooperatives, as well as just exactly what we're doing right now, having conversations about the subject, and saying people, hey, this is possible. We can do this. There are instances where people have done this, at least in smaller scale, at least pieces of it in the past. It can work if we really put our heads to it. We just have to figure out how to do it and how it's going to work. And it's not going to be the same everywhere. So if people are out there, I suggest picking up the book and reading exactly what these systems and structures entail, because it is complicated. It's a complex subject with a lot of details that need to be hashed out. And I don't have all the answers either. I kind of scratch the surface of a lot of it in my book, but I say it probably 20 times in my book. This will probably evolve, and it's probably not going to look exactly like this in the future, and things will, fail, and we have to learn from those failures and how they went wrong, and we have to pick it back up and keep going, essentially. But starting with the book, learning more about it is a great place, and then starting to actually create these systems and structures in our own lives. If there's an empty plot of land down at the end of the street, hey, maybe we can create a community garden. Hey, maybe if we have some people that are, technicians and familiar with robotics, maybe we could even start to automate some of that garden. So some of these people, there'd be less human labor involved in us actually eating, and it's like you're saying too, that is incentive in and of itself, just creating something that can feed your entire neighborhood. You know what I mean? How cool would that feel if, say, you and 4 of your friends created an automated garden that could feed 500 people in your neighborhood, right? And you got together and all had a party and celebrated and everything, and they gave you just positive feedback in that regard, and you develop relationships, and you have a sense of community and belonging and contribution and all these things that are really integral to our survival and well-being and happiness, that a lot of us aren't even really getting out of the life that we're living now. We're living these completely detached, compartmentalized lives where we're hopefully we can make enough money one day to where we can have fun, to where we can actually have some leisure and community, and just friends, and actually make a decent contribution to society. If people are like, well, can't do that because I got to pay the bills, like, okay, when can we start doing that, right? And so that's kind of the mindset that we want people to adopt as well, that, money isn't the end all be all. Having a big house and a big car isn't the ultimate goal. Creating community and relationships and having time for self-care and compassion for each other and friendship, and just really developing the things that are integral to human happiness and health and well-being. And real wealth comes in the form of having what you need, and having community and really feeling that sense of contribution and everything. So I mean, that's what we really want to create. And if people are interested in helping create that, highly suggest checking us out and letting us know what you think too, because we're always open to feedback. We're always open to, new thoughts and people coming in. We're an open discussion, and we welcome all the critiques and criticisms and whatever else we can get.
Well, where are we able to keep up to date with you? Of course, buy the book and support the cause.
Absolutely. So we have our Facebook page is a pretty decent following. We got about 250,000 followers on Facebook. Our website, moneylesssociety.com. You can check us out there. We're constantly adding and evolving the website. We're probably going to revamp it pretty soon because it needs a good revamp. We have a Facebook group with 24,000 people that has a lot of good discussions going on constantly. We have a nonprofit organization. We're always looking for volunteers and more help with this subject as well. We're actually about to implement a governance system called sociocracy, which is much more of a horizontally, democratically controlled governance system rather than one person being at the top, like myself. I'm like, I don't want it. I don't need it. We want everybody to have a say in this, and we want everybody to be involved and feel like they actually, have some sort of input, and that they're valued in the organization, and that not just expendable as a employee. So yeah, check us out. If you want to volunteer for our organization, go to our website, moneylesssociety.com. Click on the button that says contribute. You can either contribute monetarily or with your time as a volunteer. And also, if you just Google Moneyless Society, you'll find our podcast. We have a podcast of our own as well, just finishing up our 2nd season now. And we got a lot of projects going on too. We have several other organizations that are kind of getting involved with us as well. So it's growing, and it's really exciting to kind of see it taking on a life of its own and having a lot of people that are getting excited about it too. So I enjoy it.
Well, many thanks for joining us today. It's been great to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's my pleasure.